let's just begin the conversation. And the idea behind this webinar was really simple. 2 days back, there was a news in the Indian Express which reported that one of the leading universities in India had conducted a survey across teachers and across a lot of schools and maybe 50,000 teachers or so. And what they found out and what they quoted was that 90% of the teachers actually felt that no meaningful assessment can happen during online classes. Now, that is obviously a matter of grave concern. But when I look at it from one perspective, then I look at this figure of 90% as very alarming. These are the people who do not believe that online assessment or assessment through online medium is going to be effective. But at the same time, it also tells me that 90% of our teachers probably are not yet trained to conduct online assessment, and that this issue needs to be actually addressed by all of us together. We are going to be focusing on uh, creating online assessments for this 1 hour. And the way we always do that, the first half an hour, I will share a few thoughts that I have from my experience, and we'll have Balaji joining us soon, and he'll talk about it from the experience that he has as the former director, CBSE, and in charge of assessments for a very long time. And then later on, we'll open it for question answers, whatever doubts you have. Hopefully, we will be able to address them. We would love to have as many questions as possible. Just make sure you put your question and answers in the question and answer tab and not on the chat, because that makes it slightly difficult to monitor. You can also raise your hands if you want, and once you raise your hands, we'll be able a few words about my interaction with online assessment and assessment in general. The year 1992, while I was teaching mathematics at Tulane University, this is in New Orleans, USA. And in 1992, we decided as a department that we will move from the traditional method of assessment in calculus to MCQ based test. Now, at that point in 1992, I was very apprehensive as to whether or not we will be successful in assessing students accurately using MCQs, because mathematics is something which most of the problems are multi-step problems. So I was not sure whether it'll work or this experiment will go down the drains. And I think the same level of anxiety and doubt is prevalent in 90% of the teachers today in India, because we are also going through that transition from traditional assessment to MCQ assessment. Now, my apprehensions were addressed and answered after we got a pretty rigorous training from the experts in assessment in the Department of Education at Tulane. And after that whole training got over is when I got slightly convinced and we started making MCQs as the final summative assessment. Now, this was still a pen and paper test, but students would not really write down all the solutions, but take a MCQ during that test. And one other thing that we did, which was remarkable, and I was very new to this concept, is that we started this concept of cheat sheet. A cheat sheet is an official farra, as we call it. So every student was allowed to bring in one A4 size sheet. On one side of it, the student could write anything that he wants. And the idea behind that particular initiative was that we did not want students to spend time unnecessarily memorizing formulas or theorems for that matter, but we wanted to focus more on assessing their understanding of those formulas as well as understanding of the concepts and also application of those concepts to real new problems. We wanted to move away from memorization, so we decided, look, let's allow them a cheat sheet, and it worked pretty well. We did not have any problem whatsoever. And the best part was that we also, once we started doing these MCQs, we also realized later on over the years that, well, welcome Balaji, thank you so much.
So I had a hardware problem.
Yes, the hardware problem. So in your absence, I started,
That's nice.
sharing my thoughts.
Lovely.
So I will come back to you in a minute or two.
Absolutely, no issues.
So continuing where I was, when we switched from the traditional assessment to MCQ based assessment, over the years, what we saw was that the normative curve of performance of students remained pretty much the same. So any apprehensions that we had as a department or I had as an individual that MCQ cannot correctly assess the learning abilities of a child were proved wrong. And the same thing was actually confirmed by Dr. Claire Lee. Now, Dr. Claire Lee is from England. She's from Oxford, and she is considered the queen of assessment in England. She has done a lot of research in assessment, and I was very fortunate that I got a chance to work with her in India on a project which was led by MHRD, and it was part of the UK government and MHRD initiative. Now, clearly also said the same thing, that MCQs are as effective as subjective tests, and they are not any less affected. So, if we have any doubt in our minds that an MCQ based test is less effective and gives us less insight into the child's learning, that is false. That is a myth, and that myth needs to be dropped down as soon as possible. The reason also is that the National Education Policy, if you have read it, in its assessment chapter, it talks about even progressive assessment techniques like adaptive learning, adaptive testing. Now, adaptive testing, once it needs to be implemented, you would require technology and you would require a huge database of questions which are properly tagged and which are linked to each other, because that is the only way adaptive testing can happen. And for those of you who are not aware of adaptive testing, pretty much what it means is that every question that a student sees is selected from a database based on the response of the child, response of the student in a previous question. So if the student has gotten a particular question wrong, and that is a difficulty level 3 question, for example, it's a challenging question, then the database will show him a question which is slightly below that level of difficulty. So each child actually gets different questions in an assessment, and that's adaptive testing, where the test adapts to the abilities and the knowledge of a student to find out exactly where the student stands, what does he know and what does he not know. So what we're going to be doing is that in this particular session, I'm going to be taking you through some of the steps of creating good assessment items. What are the important things that you need to know? And I've been doing that since 2000, when with eGurukul, Dr. Natarajan was the first person. He's a well-known figure. He's based out of Bangalore, and he has written several books on assessment, Dr. V. Natarajan. And he also was working with ETS in Princeton. ETS is Education Testing and Service, so which this is the company that conducts SAT exam, GRE, GMAT, etc. And they have been doing this. They specialized in testing. So I started doing assessment in the year 2000, and over the years I've created about 1 lakh items of different kinds for different organizations. So I'm going to take you through the steps to create assessment items. But before that, I would want to invite Balaji to please come and share with us some of his insights into assessment and how we all should be looking at assessment in the future, and how a test paper needs to be designed, because I don't think we could have anybody more qualified and experienced than him to talk on this topic. So Balaji, over to you, and after you, then I'll take over and put my second segment in place.
Thank you, Atulji, and I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Thank you, everybody, and good evening to all of you. Well, it's a very interesting and a gravitating topic that we have today. As one who had the opportunity of working with the CBSE, especially in the examination department for several of the years, setting question papers and playing with the questions, and subsequently being in charge of the All India Engineering Entrance Exam, All India Medical Entrance Examinations, I know how difficult it is to set a question paper. My journey with the question papers started sometime way back in 1977 when I was invited to set a question paper for class 10 examinations of the board, when I was a senior PGT at the point of time. Well, I really believe that, setting a question, a single question takes nearly about 20 to 30 minutes, right? It is not that you look at some words and then put a question because you have a piece of knowledge and then you are translating that knowledge into a question. Because, questioning is the basis of all the assessment. We all look at the children in terms of the marks that they have got, in terms of the achievements that they have made. But basically, the mismatch between knowledge, and the assessment is really creating problems today. Because, I still remember as a student, when I was in a state board school, I secured 60 marks in English in the school, and I was possibly the first rank holder of my school. But today, if you have anyone who is having 60 marks in English, probably you will call him by names, right? Because the idea of marks has dominated our mind, and the objective was is basically that we need to promote candidates. We have been playing with the numbers of promoting candidates from one level to the other. In other words, creating a journey of facilitating the journey of elevation in the classes, rather than trying really to assess the piece of knowledge of these students at this point of time. So when you really come to, look at the question paper, there are several elements that we have in designing a question paper, and I'm sure all of you are aware about the blueprint of the question paper, which is pretty old. We can relate it to Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm sure everyone who has done a B.Ed or M.Ed will know what are the elements of that. Basically, we have been playing only the three fundamentals of Bloom's taxonomy, namely knowledge, understanding, and skills. And then at a given point of time, about 40 years before, I think the knowledge component attracted about 50% of the scores, and 30% of the scores came for the understanding, and the 20% came for the skills. Over the years, we have been migrating with the knowledge component coming to 30%, and then the another 30% coming to the understanding component, and the remaining 40% being, allocated for skills and application. Right. But nevertheless, the point basically is when we set the question paper, do we really understand that whether it is really examining the understanding component or the knowledge and the skill component, right? Because the superficial wordings of a question paper do not really reflect the core competency that you are trying to find out. So my only thing is that the idea of reinventing our assessment and question papers should not be focused on 10th class and 12th class question papers. We should start it with rather LKG and rather matter of class 1, because we need to understand that the idea of questioning is not really to promote a candidate. The idea of questioning is basically to facilitate the exercise of building the knowledge, to facilitate the question of curiosity and inquisitiveness in the child. And I think the questioning skill was for one of the most fundamental things that in the learning process. Probably the Socratic model that we had, the Aristotelian model that we had, was all based on questioning. Even in Indian philosophy, we look at the entire Upanishad was constructed based on the questions of the question between the teacher and the disciple, the preceptor and the disciple. And therefore, let's look at the questions not exclusively for an examination purpose of class 10th and 12th or promoting a candidate midterm assessment is that. It is an integral part of the learning exercise, and therefore questioning is a running component of a pedagogy. Right? It is not an external component to a curriculum and pedagogy. It's a running component. So my first suggestion to all of you will be that you must really look at the concept of the question paper, because there is a lot of misunderstanding about the question. When I have gone to several what's called star-studded schools where I have seen the printed question papers. In a single paper page, you find about 17 to 18 mistakes, not necessarily print, but conceptual. Remember one thing, I have always been telling the principals and teachers that the question papers are ambassadors of your schools, right? Because the parents don't know what you are teaching, how you are teaching, and what is a piece of knowledge. But when they look at the question paper, they evaluate what is the quality of the school. And therefore, remember that the exercise of doing a question paper in a school has got to be sacrosanct and has to be approached with the kind of meticulousness and not as a routine exercise to be done. You've got a controller of exam in your school, and then you have the papers given and some editors doing that. No. See, a question paper has got a number of components. There was a beautiful book by one Dr. Pritam Singh from NCRT, who was the head of the NCRT at some point of time. And I don't think we have got a book of that kind anywhere. And he details into the idea of setting a question paper. Number one, when you look at a question, there are three important components. One, you have to look at the syntax of the question. Most probably, we run the question because, we want to either have it very easy or difficult. We look at the difficulty level of the question rather than the syntax of a question, because the syntax conveys what really you want to assess. Right, the level of difficulty, because every single word, when, what, how, we call them the target words. No single word can be replaced. For example, if you want to assess the knowledge component, you have got about 30 different words, and you got to understand the understanding component. You have got the 30 different words. Describe and discuss will not be the same thing. Detail and state will not be the same thing. So every single word, has a different meaning. Now never no school examines that. For example, narrate and describe. There's a lot of difference between these two important. So I would very much like that you need to look at these target words and a separate exercise has to be done to the teachers right from class LKG onwards. What is the meaning of such words? And list and state are not the same thing. Therefore, remember one thing, syntax is very important. The verbal architecture of the question is very, very important, because people just put across a question, sometimes whether it's singular, plural, what it conveys, past tense or Therefore, there is a lack of application for the in the preparation of the mind. So very often when you set a question paper, there is every possibility of a duplicity of an answer, right? A duplicity of an answer. I can narrate a few examples to you also, that the question paper is geographically, socially, culturally, and what do you call, academically, it has a locus. Children could find out how who has set the question paper. Let me describe an example to you. Somewhere in 1988, when I was the controller of examinations officiating, I was going on a trip to schools. I went to DPS Arkepuram. That was an English paper. And when I was coming out of the paper, the school, almost the exam was over. I overheard two children speaking to each other. One told the other, right, "Ye paper no to kisi ne Madrasi ne kiya hai." I was shocked how they could use that word. The other girl asked, "Kaise kaha tumne?" Immediately that, you see, the first comprehension is from Mahabalipuram. The second is from, the address given is from Chennai. So the whole thing gives the personality, the profile of a teacher is reflected through the question paper. Remember, so that's a very important. Second thing is, don't take the questions for granted. There have been occasions when in the board, a question paper appeared for class 10 mathematics examination, when it was what you call construction of a triangle, right? Maths teachers will know pretty well that you draw a line and take an arc, and then the arc's cut, and then you draw the triangle, the construction problem. But in Delhi, when the students were working, the arcs were not cutting with each other. And I had to face a parliament question next day. What do you call star question? That how could the board ask a question where the answer was wrong? And when we checked up with the paper setter said, "Sir, this is NCRT, this particular chapter, this particular question. I have only taken that and given that question." The fact, whether it's NCRT, I'm not blaming any organization. The fact that a question is available in a book doesn't indicate that it has to be a right question. You have to go through that question paper very, very, very well. So remember that every single question has got to be meticulous. To whom are we asking? To what clients we are asking? What is the difficulty level in which we should ask that? Now, very often you should provide, as I said, multiplicity of answers. I was narrating to Atulji yesterday a very interesting example, right, where a teacher, I know one of the schools asked, write a paragraph on any one of the following, right? If I were the Prime Minister of India, if I were the Mayor of Chennai, and if I were the Nizam of Hyderabad. One of the naughty students of the class took the third one as if I were the Nizam of Hyderabad, and wrote a very nasty answer. And the next day, the teacher came and was shouting at the top of her voice in the staff room. And then I had to say, "Look, you have asked a question, yes, responded. Therefore, you have to be extremely careful about the way that you ask a question, right?" The point is, a question has got several types of questions. The same concept can be asked in several ways. For example, it can be a verbal question, it can be a non-verbal question, it can be a graphical question, right? So we must, unfortunately, in Indian system, 99% of all our questions are verbal, right? That is the, to me, a curse of the system. We don't think that we can set the questions differently. If you go to countries abroad, you will find there is a cartoon from in London Times, during the Second World War, and the cartoon is given over there, and then they ask a question that what Mr. Churchill wanted to convey through this particular message. But you have to be careful in selecting that it doesn't affect any political, religious, or cultural impact of that. So it's setting a question paper calls for a lot of sensitivity, right? Sensitivity. Further, you will remember one thing: we have moved a long way in the last 30 to 40 years about our understanding, our approach to the question, because the dynamics of knowledge was very limited. the impact of informal learning on formal learning was very limited. But today, informal learning is very high, and therefore we need to test the learning of the child rather than the teaching that we have done. Unfortunately, most of our classrooms we test what what we have done rather than what the child would have learned. Therefore, setting a question has to be done. For example, I'll give you a question that also provides an opportunity for what is called testing multiple intelligences. Unfortunately, we don't understand the multiple intelligences in the right way. We only play with the words and people believe that we can teach multiple intelligences. We can never teach multiple intelligences. Multiple intelligences can only be assessed through the articulation of the answers of the child, and for that the question should facilitate the opportunity. I was also quoting an example. For example, in class 3, in CRT book, you got a chapter called games, right? You got a games. Now, normally what we do, we ask about what is the game, what is the cricket, how many people are. But then when you ask a question to your child, discuss with your physical education teacher why warm-up exercises are necessary before starting a game, right? It's very important. It may not be reflecting at the game, but then a lot of components which are associated with that. Discuss with your grandfather and find out what kind of games they played when you was young. Discuss with your father and find out what kind of games they played when you was young. And mention 2 games which you play. What kind of differences do you find in that? So remember, the entire structure of your question paper from class 1 has got to absolutely change. That calls for a total change in the mindset, and every school with the new education policy coming through should undertake an exercise of training their teachers of different faculties. I'm not talking about each subject, right? But for everybody. And sometimes same thing when it comes to languages, we are only testing what you call the writing skills. We have not gone through to what is called listening skills and speaking skills. We have not standardized in that, but they play a very significant game. Writing skills play a lower level of operation in the official world, but speaking exercises do. Last but not the least, I would like to focus on one thing which Atul was talking about, the multiple choice questions. I tell you, he was absolutely right to say that multiple choice questions provide a wonderful opportunity of thinking, the intuition, the thinking, the creativity, thinking the analytical approach of the child as compared to the standardized questions. But you have to have the right type of multiple choice question. To me, setting a multiple choice question is much more difficult than setting questions of other kind, because normally what we do is we give 4 choices, and what the A, B, C, A, B, C, D we give, and then we say choices A or B, B or C, or any one of the above, or none of the above, either of the above. So that's absolutely not the way of really setting a question paper. When we had to set a question for the engineering and medical examination, the most important aspect of setting a question is that the child should be provoked to think, right, about the question. For example, normally the 4 choices that are given, one is visually incorrect. What is that? Visually incorrect. The second, provocative. Kya ye answer ho sakta hai kya? Third choice, right? Apparently correct. हाँ ये correct है, but it will not be correct because उसमें कुछ है अंदर, right? Then correct. So setting 4 choices, to me, getting these 4 choices is very difficult, and to set one question of that kind, I will take at least 30 to 40 minutes, right? It is not that. So remember, these types of multiple choice questions, MI-based questions, and then one more point which I would like to add. Remember, when we come to types of learners, we have got visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, and all that. But all the questions we said, we put only for the visual learners, and we don't have questions for auditory. So can you set questions which will meet, because a child who is very good in auditory competency is not in visual competency, may not be able to deliver a correct answer for that. So all these things have to be kept in mind. And last but not the least, when given all these answers, when the child comes with an answer, right, we must have the courage to accept the answer. One of the major drawbacks in Indian education system has been the right answer syndrome. I have always been talking for the last 10 years. I'm not saying you should not pursue the right answer, but you also think that there could be yet another answer. That why, to me, when the child has done something wrong, it's very important in a classroom for the teacher to call the child and ask a question, right, why he has done that. Because the mistake that is done by the child is, maybe the cause for something. I will conclude with a small anecdote, right? Give me one more minute, Atul. Hope you'll agree, right?
Yes, sir. Always. I can never interrupt you.
Well, I've told this particular anecdote in many platforms, which relates to a young boy was studying in class 7 of a school in a country abroad. The physics teacher who came there, in the midterm test asked a question, which was very interesting. The question was, how would you find the height of a building using a barometer, right? And, barometer is meant for pressure, right? And everybody wrote an answer. And this boy, very intelligent boy, also wrote an answer. And when the teacher assessed the paper, the teacher gave him 0 out of 10. The boy went to the teacher and said, "Sir, my answer is right." The teacher said, "Your answer may be right, but that's not what I want." And that's exactly happens in our classrooms, right? That's not what I want, right? So there was an argument between the teacher and the child. And in the UK, there was a provision that if the teacher and the child don't agree, there could be an arbitrator who will decide who is right, who is wrong, and accordingly award the marks. So the arbitrator was brought in over there, and then the arbitrator gave a white paper to this boy and gave him 5 minutes time and say you'll have to complete it within 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, the boy comes back and gives a blank sheet of paper without any answer. And the arbitrator looks at him and says, "Hey, you stupid, you seem to be a mischief monger. You don't know the answer. You're creating problems in the class." The child boy smiled and said, "That's not the problem, sir. I know many answers, but I don't know which answer you want," right? And then he said, "You know many answers? Can you tell me?" The boy said, "Yes, sir. I can, you take the pendulum to the top of the building, right? Attach a rope to the pendulum, allow the rope to fall in, find the height of the rope. That's the height of the building. You don't need mathematics for that, right?" And allow the pendulum to oscillate, find the amplitude of the pendulum. From that, you can calculate what is the height of the building. You take the pendulum to the ground floor, find what is the value of G. You find what is the value of G at the top. From the difference, you can calculate what is the height of the building. You take the pendulum outside, keep it in the sunshine, find what is the height of the shadow of the building and what is the height of the shadow of the pendulum. From the ratio and proportion, you can calculate height of the building. I know many more answers, sir, but I don't know which answer you would require, right? Nevertheless, there is one more answer, that as you finish this exercise and walk out, there is a storekeeper who knows what is the correct height of the building. You can ask him what is the answer and then award him this pendulum as a prize. That's also an answer, sir. And this story, anecdote, is dedicated to one of the greatest Nobel laureates, scientist called Niels Bohr. That's it. People, there are many answers to a question. There could be. That's what we call intuition. And I think we have to promote learning through assessment and not use learning to moderate, minimize, and subdue the competencies of the learner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much for this insightful journey of assessment. And I think in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll try to wrap up by giving you an idea of what, elaborate on some of the concepts that Balaji talked about. I think one of the very important key aspects that he said was that a question paper is the ambassador of the school. And that's something that we need to understand. Harvard is known because of Harvard's assessment, because they ask tough questions. And if you want to build the reputation of your school, what is important for you would be to create a question bank for your school. I think that is something that we have never, ever focused on. But moving forward, each school would require to create a question bank. And as Balaji said, that each and every teacher would need to be trained on writing good quality assessment items. So very quickly, I'm going to take you through the process. But first, let me just, some of you might not be aware of the terminology that is used in creating MCQ. So I'm going to share that terminology and then share the steps that are required to create a question of that sort. So when we talk about a multiple choice question, we usually refer to it as an item. So each question is referred as an item. This item has different parts. The most important part, which is the question, is called a stem. That is where we pose the scenario and the question to the child. And after that, we have the correct options, which can be one or two. And then we have the incorrect options, which are called distractors. Okay, so they are called distractors. For each of the distractor, we need a rationale as to why we are choosing that particular rationale. You just heard, Balaji talk about the way we write multiple choice, that this is visually incorrect, this is, none of the above or all the above, B and C only, etc. Well, that's not how you choose distractors. We choose distractors based on common misconceptions and myths associated with that particular concept. So that's a very important part. Now, the second important thing that we do is we need to tag all these questions that we create to a particular taxonomy or a classification, because we need to classify questions. Now, a long time ago, most of the questions were classified or tagged according to Bloom's taxonomy. But since about 10 years or so, that practice has almost stopped. Now people are actually tagging questions based on Norman Webb's depth of knowledge levels. Now, if you understand these depths of knowledge, so this is not the DOK levels of Norman Webb are not a taxonomy like Bloom's is, but this was created to primarily standardize the use of Bloom's taxonomy in assessment items. So there are four levels of knowledge according to Norman Webb's classification. The first level, which is called DOK1, is factual, which is a recall of facts. If any one of you has seen Kaun Banega Karodpati, think about all the questions that are posed on KBC. All of them are merely recall questions. They are all questions based on recalling of a fact. So they are all DOK1 questions. The only difference between 1,000 rupee question and a 1 crore rupee question is the level of difficulty involved in recalling that particular question or the kind of knowledge that is required. But all of those questions are DOK1 questions. So DOK1 questions can also be very tough, and they can be very easy also. The second level, DOK2, depth of knowledge level 2, is skills and concepts, where we are gauging the skills or concepts of the student. And the third level is strategic thinking, which is DOK3. And the fourth level is extended thinking, which is DOK4. Now, what happens is all of these things are mapped to Bloom's taxonomy also. Most of the times, it is impossible for us to create a question of DOK4 because that requires more time to answer, and it requires observation of something over a period of time, which is not possible on a MCQ test. So the only three kinds of questions that you can create is DOK1, DOK2, DOK3. Now, Balaji did talk about the time being spent on creating an MCQ. I totally agree with him. Creating a good assessment item, which is a multiple choice item, takes a lot longer than even what he said. In my experience, we have worked with large teams of 50 item writers also at the same time. But in my experience, if I had to tell you how much time do you need to create these assessment items, a DOK 1 item would take you approximately 1 hour. A DOK 2 item would take you approximately 3 hours, and a DOK 3 item would take as much as 6 hours for its final completion. So that is the kind of time that is required to create DOK 1, 2, and 3 items. Another important thing, in my experience, when we were creating this with large amount of teams, not everybody can create questions of each DOK level. Unfortunately, if you want to create a question of DOK 3 level, which is a question on strategic thinking, if the teacher does not have in-depth knowledge of the subject, it's going to be impossible for that teacher to create a DOK 3 level test. And that is the reason when sometimes, when I go in for interviews of teachers, or some schools call me for that, the best way to interview teachers is to ask them to frame a question, and ask them to frame the toughest possible question on any topic of their choice. And based on the question that they frame, you can actually gauge the knowledge level of an individual. So if I do not understand my subject deeply, I will not be able to create a DOK 3 level question. So for all the principals who are joining us, if you want to conduct training programs in your school, you might have to create 3 different teams, where DOK 1 questions are being set by one kind of people, and DOK 3 questions are being set by another kind of people. So this is about the depth of knowledge levels, which is extremely important. And in each of those depth of knowledge, the level of difficulty of the question can vary. So there are 2 tags that are assigned to each question. One is what DOK level, and the second is the difficulty level of the child. Now, what are the steps in which you create these questions? It always begins with defining a learning outcome. So you have to remember that each multiple choice question has to map to a very specific learning outcome. Now, I was just recently, I think 2 days back, I was reading the learning outcomes published by NCRT for higher secondary classes. Those learning outcomes are a complete waste of time, and I can just say that without any bias towards NCRT. They are so broad. They are so broad that they are useless. They are uselessly broad. I hope somebody from NCRT is listening to me, and they do another exercise to define more crisp learning outcomes. So you will have to do that yourself. You have to take up a crisp learning outcome which is specific, narrow enough to be tested. And why do we do that? I'll tell you that also. If you pose a multiple choice question to a student based on a particular learning outcome, then the response to that question should help you conclude without any doubt whether the child has attained that learning outcome or not. And if the child has not attained the learning outcome, what are the possible misconceptions that the child has? These 2 very, very important things. So please remember, a good assessment item, a good multiple choice assessment item tells you 2 things. First, whether or not the child has attained a learning outcome. And if the child has not attained the learning outcome, then where are the gaps? If you don't get these 2 information from the response, then possibly that assessment item is useless. You really cannot use that too much. So you start with a learning outcome. You define the STEM, which Balaji very rightly explained that when you're writing the problem, each and every word has to be understood, and you have to know exactly what the child is expected to do when he reads that particular word. A lot of times we try to frame questions in a confusing manner because we want to trick the child. Our job is not to trick the child. Our job is to find out what the child knows and what he does not know so that we can help him. So there's no point giving him redundant information in the question. There's no point using vocabulary that the child will not be able to understand. There's no point just superficially. I think I love those words. Superficial wording of the questions cannot be used while taking the writing down the stem. The third step, so once you have written down the stem and it is correct, and trust me, it takes a lot of training to write good stems. It's not something obvious. It will require you to practice and get trained on writing good stems. The third is that you correctly solve the problem or write the correct answer to the problem. Now, from these correct possible answers, and as Balaji said, there could be a situation where there are multiple correct options. You have to write all of them down from every perspective, okay? Not just your own perspective, but from every possible perspective. You have to write down all the correct answers, and from there, you have to choose one or two correct options for the multiple choice question. Now, how many multiple choice options should you have? Most of the times, there are four. But research shows that if you have five options, then the probability of a child guessing and getting through to an exam are decreased substantially. So if you look at the research, the ideal number is five. The most popular number is four. Okay, so that's how the number of choices you are. How do you choose the distractors? Once you have written down the solution or the answer, you have to be able to understand and ask yourself, what are the myths? What are the misconceptions? What are the common errors that a student will actually do once he goes through this question? And from each of those common errors, from each of those misconceptions, the distractor comes out. One distractor would come out. The distractors cannot be lookalikes. So a lot of time we feel that if the correct answer is 5 by 3, let me also give 3 by 5 as an example. That is the most ridiculous way of creating an option. Okay, so you're not talking about lookalikes here, that or you try to make it as narrow as possible, that if 10% is the right answer, then let me also have 9%, 11%, and 13%. Well, that's not the way a good assessment item is created. So your distractors need to come from common errors and myths, and that's plenty in every subject. If I go to language also, there would be a lot of misconceptions and common errors that students make in languages, and they have to be incorporated as distractors. Now, the most important thing is when you're writing a distractor, you have to give a rationale as to when do you feel that the child will select that particular option. So that rationale behind the distractor is absolutely important to be documented. Okay, you can't just write a distractor because you feel it. Trust me, a lot of times we rejected items because the rationale was not good enough for the distractor to be included in the question bank. So once you write your rationals, then you know two things. You know what feedback to give to student if he chooses the wrong option. And that's a very powerful feature of an online MCQ, that the student gets an instant feedback on the response, which is not possible in some other forms of assessment. And this instant feedback is one of the strongest elements of formative assessment. So if we want to implement formative assessment, we have to give instant feedback. And therefore, when we are writing a question, the feedback has to be recorded there. Now, these are the elements of how a multiple choice question are created. There is obviously, when we started doing this work, earlier we used to do it on a piece of paper. But my advice to you would be, if you want to do this, you create a template, and this template is what records every element of the question. So it's a long process, but the good thing is that MCQs are clonable and reusable. So the time that you will spend, so if you create one good DOK 3 level question, then you can create at least 10 clones out of it. Now, this clone is a term used by assessment writers, which reflects that this clone is almost similar to the original item, but differs from it either in context or in numerical values or in other minor ways, so that the DOK level and the difficulty level stay the same. You cannot change the DOK and the difficulty level of a clone as it is from the original item. So they have to remain the same, but you can make minor modifications around it. So that's how you actually create multiple choice questions. There are a lot of apprehensions you would have that multiple choice questions, it's very easy to cheat on them, etc., etc. Those kind of things actually don't happen. So with that, I'm going to stop and start picking up some questions. Balaji, we have 14 questions. Right. I am going to, pick up some of them. Okay, so dear sir, request to please throw light on value points to be presented, time to be taken for answering for a particular type of question, say of 3 marks, and also about preparing of marking scheme. That's from Mr. Regi Oman from Sultanate of Oman. There's another question which I'll take, and you can take both of them together. Hope questions in the question paper should test the learning outcomes. If so, how to prepare a standard question paper? How does one decide how to give choices? I've already taken that up. How assessments conclude child's attainment? Kindly suggest. So, sir, over to you for these 2-3 questions that you have.
Yeah, one thing is, the first question which relates to the value points of question. As a matter of fact, the paper setter himself or herself should articulate value points alongside the question, right? And as a matter of fact, the value points articulated by the paper setter will give an insight to the paper setter whether they have solved the right question or not, number one. Second is that, very often, the children tend to be very descriptive and narrative to their answers. And that really distracts the focus on the value point, right? Let me give an example to you. Which, during the CBSE times when we had worked on that. There was a question in class 10 about, the good work done by, in social studies by Akbar, right? Focus on that. And what happened was the boy went on narrating that he dug wells, he planted trees, this, that. And actually the question was relating to the financial system of during the revenue system of Akbar, right? But he went on writing about how many wells he had, how many roads he had, so all kinds of things. So the point basically is you may write one paragraph, right? That. Let me give another example to you, which is more appropriate and personal to me. My memory goes back to 1967, 67, when I wrote my IAS examination for the first time, right? In those days, we were given 10 topics and we had to write essay on one topic. I wrote a topic, chose a topic called "The Ambition is the Grand Enemy of All Peace," right? And that had 150 marks. I wrote for 47 pages on this particular topic, and I was absolutely, very happy about it. But you won't believe that when the results came, I passed out in almost all the papers except this paper, where I had written for 47 pages, and I was, right at the top of my at the point of time. And as any student would say, I wouldn't believe, I expected about 110, I got 11 marks, right? I went back to and fought with the people, and then when I had the opportunity to listen to the people who looked into my paper, you know what they said? Mr. Bala, you've done extremely a good essay. I said, that's what I presume. They said, you have a deep understanding of the topic. Fine. But then he said, out of the 47 pages, you have written only for half a page what you wanted to say about the topic. And right from Vedic period to Gandhiji, whatever they said about the ambition of grand enemy of power, you have done. We have evaluated only half the page where you have said what you wanted to say. You understand the difference? Right? So when a question is addressed, right, the question is what is revealed by the learner is more important rather than what is said all otherwise. So that's where the question paper has to come. The value points have to be focused and detailed, and every value point, whether it's half a mark or a single mark, should be articulated and listed alongside the paper setting. That is an integral part of paper setting. That's the answer that I would like to give. Right? What's the other question, dear?
The other question was related to how assessments conclude child's attainment.
Oh, that's a fantastic. Probably, as a matter of fact, I draw a clue from what you said. To me, the incorrect answer of the child is an index to his performance, right? Because, there could be several cases where the children by rote learning can memorize the answer and give, right? But in a number of cases when they go wrong, it is not because they have the right answer in their memory, but they have thought some way differently. So it gives an insight to thinking, right? And then in that particular process of thinking, it could, when we talk about linear thinking, analytical thinking, parallel thinking, critical thinking, so many creative thinking. So all these things provide different types of answers over that. Therefore, the answer may be wrong, but nevertheless, it may say that the child is very creative. The answer may be wrong, but it may say the child is very analytical. The answer may be wrong, but still they say that the child has an intuition. So the question basically is, now when you look at the formative assessment, we only look at what you call the correct answers. We don't look at. That's why in CBSE in those days, we used to bring a book called the performance analysis, if you remember right. After every examination is over, for select subjects, we used to take about 2,000 answer books and try to see that how many students got between 90 to 100, 80 to 90, and then we took what are the common mistakes and try to find out what kind of commonalities are there in the mistakes or what kind of uniqueness is there in the types of mistakes. And therefore, to me, the assessment is very close to the normal distribution curve, right? Very close. So the skewing of positive skewing, negative skewing, and you will also find that the positive skewing and negative skewing could be specific to your class, right? Specific to your school, specific to your geography, or specific to your unit. You understand? Yes. So, that's where unfortunately all the teachers should be discussing in the school, in the staff room, and also at least once in 15 days in the school is on the performance profile of the students and the mistakes they do. And I am sorry to say, in my 50 years of being in education, no school has really discussed it anywhere in a common platform, right? They only single out the child, but they don't bring it to a platform for, further learning. In our Indian education system, examinations, which are a huge treasure house for building a knowledge profile, have remained more as statistics and, more on the museum rather than on the knowledge profile. That's my view.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's very, very important moving forward, as we go into blended learning, and also as we try to implement NEP into our schools. I think it's important that we start bringing assessment into the forefront of discussion. And I would strongly recommend that you create a team, which is the assessment reform team within your school of 5 to 8 teachers, and give them this job to first skill themselves and then take it forward to others. Just the last question I'll take up: how can we really use the strategy being discussed at the preschool level? Sheetal Achoriwala. So I think the preschool level is almost the same thing. There is recall, There is some concepts that are being developed during play school, and there is thinking that preschoolers are also doing. So the same thing would happen, just to make life easy. Instead of having a item which has 4 or 5 choices, you will give child just 2 choices, out of which he or she can choose, and it can be created into a nice game also. A lot of gamification can happen in the primary level, as well as in the preschool level, for preschools. So, having said that, we are at 6:01, and to retain our punctuality, we could not take up all the questions, but we will definitely address them. I'll share it with Balaji sir. Maybe I can share these with you, and you can write a few notes so we can have it back to them. We can create a mail so that we can send it back to them.
I
And
have a recommendation, Atulji, before you
yes,
close.
absolutely, absolutely.
ICSL should take up a complete training program for the teachers of all schools online, whether free or out of cost, for 1 week on various domains, because I think it's a great service ICSL will do for the country and the teachers.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think we will take up these words, and we will, try to design a training program. Right now, we have Reset, which is a program which is running for 3 weeks, and the next one is going to start from the 30th. And we do look at assessment, pedagogy, and a lot of other ways how to use technology in that 3 week program. So, hope some of you go to our website, try to find the link for it, and register for it. It's an excellent live program. It's not online, it's not webinar, it's all live sessions. A lot of interactivity would happen there. So do find out more about it. And thank you for coming back to Friday at 5 every week.